Cohort analysis. Who knows of cohort analysis? Half the room. Who doesn't know of cohort analysis? A third of the room. Who understands cohort analysis? 5 people. Cohort analysis is super powerful. You should all do it. It's very simple. I'm going to take you through it. Let's start by saying, why is it relevant? Take any metric you're measuring at all. This example here, active users. It could be any metric though. We measure it monthly or weekly. That's great, and we want to know if we're improving over time. The problem with this is that any metric where, say, we've got the percentage of our users are active, any metric where we're measuring it over our entire all-time user base is going to have problems. The reason is that as over time, we get more and more and more users that signed up in the past that just haven't been around in ages. Like early people, well, there wasn't a fit. They just haven't logged in. And so we're trying to measure whether we improve our product and that has a good effect. If we're factoring all these people that didn't even see the improvements, then that doesn't make any sense. And the key point, the effect is that we end up drowning out any change we may otherwise be observing, right? And so our overall like metric sort of is, any change in that is lost in the noise. So cohort analysis is just a simple technique to fix this problem. So what we want to do is we want to figure out over time if our user behavior is improving, if the product changes we're making are making a difference, if we're getting better over time. So we just take the same data and present it in a different way. Very simple. You just divide your users up into buckets or cohorts. So these are just groups of users. And typically you choose groups based on the time they signed up or the time they first purchased, right? And so we say before it was like what percentage of users were active in January. Now it's of the users who signed up in January, how many of them were active 1 month later? How many of them were active 2 months later? So for January, it's like the blue line is February and the red line is March. For the February, it's like how many people signed up were active 1 month after sign up. So that's the blue line here is how many were active in March. So actually, this blue line here and this red line here is the same period of time. It's 2 months after sign up for January and 1 month after sign up for February. And so by doing this, we're restricting to measure that metric just over like the relevant group of users. And so over time, we can now, this draws out any change that may be happening. So say we're improving our product and we're trying to figure out whether we get an improvement in activity, and we can see, okay, maybe we didn't make much improvement here. Maybe for March, the March cohort, we made some great improvements that made people stick around for a month. But there was actually no effect in them sticking around in the second month. So it was sort of like initial interest got better, and then it dropped off over time. And then here we can say, oh, but actually the product improvements we made by April and May were actually driving longer term retention of active users. Super key concept, basic approach, group our users per time. Does anyone have any questions on this? Say again, sorry? So typically, a good place to start is weekly cohorts or fortnightly or monthly cohorts, right? So you just regularly in the habit of looking at over time, are our users, improving in their behavior? Is our conversion rate going up? Are our metrics getting better? And so it's related, though, to A/B testing. So you could use your cohort buckets by which bucket of the A/B test did a user get exposed to, and it's the same idea. Then you'd only have 2 buckets, right? And it's the same idea, like which bucket performed better over time. But if you use like weekly or monthly cohorts, typically the people in that cohort may have been exposed to like different product changes. What you're really measuring is the output of all the things we're doing. Are we moving in the right direction? Does that make sense? Cool. At the back. Different groups that you can put users into. if I understand correctly, the main one is the time of sign up or the time of their first action. And that'll be 90% of the cohorts you use. Another example is the different buckets of the A/B test. People typically don't think about that under the title cohort analysis, but it's exactly the same thing. And actually this afternoon, when I talk about tracking, we'll have a lot more examples about all the different parameters that could be relevant here. So I'll come back to that later if that's okay.
What about geographic?
Yeah, geographic. If you've got users in different geographies, they could behave differently. Another way to think about it is this: you're expanding into new markets. Your behavior of new markets is probably going to be very different to behavior of places you're already saturated or you're already well known and up and running. And so basically, anytime you average anything over your entire user base, that's a bad thing. Averages suck, right? Because they hide the detail of what's going on underneath. So avoid averages and break down into these cohorts so that you can figure out the different behaviors. If that makes sense. So this is useful. So my final piece of content for this afternoon is about my own personal experience with my startup group spaces, and the sort of successes and challenges I had with cohort analysis, and sort of how I found an approach that was very successful for me. And this is related to the observation that a lot of the data we need is actually in our own database. So everything I've just talked about is about adding tracking, adding things on top. Maybe we already have some of that data. So the cohort analysis is great, but I found personally it was really time-consuming to put together. And if you've tried it, you may empathize. There's also delays to get the latest data, because we have to wait for the cohort to come to an end before we can do that calculation. And it's inflexible, because we don't just roll out new features on the 1st of every month or the 1st of every week. We want to roll stuff out all the time and then measure the difference. So I was scratching my head about this for years, actually, and found it really frustrating. But eventually, I came up with this approach that worked really well for me. So I'm just going to run through it quickly in case it's useful for you. So I kind of think about rolling cohorts. So that might give you some clue as to where we're going. The comparison is, so this traditional cohorts, fixed windows, the bar chart type view, fixed cohorts, monthly or weekly. Compare against this. So here, what I've got is I've got two metrics, so in a similar style. So these are activation metrics. So the blue this is actually for Group Spaces, my previous company. So the blue is an activation. So it's how many people within 7 days of sign up took any major actions, right? So they signed up and then did they do anything? And you can see over time, we started at 30% and we improved it over time and got up to about 75%. Winner, fantastic. And this is a daily thing, right? So you remember how we did the 28 averages before to smooth out the pattern. However, compare with the red line, which is within the same 7-day window, how many people came back after 24 hours and took any major action? So the difference, basically the gap between the two, all this lift for the blue is people that are doing all the actions in the first 24 hours, right? But they're not coming back and doing them between day 1 and day 7. So what this is telling me is that over time, we managed to improve the activation, the engagement in the first session after sign up. We had great success. But the sad thing is, it never translated into meaningful growth, right? So real lesson there to share with you all to keep an eye on this. And so the format of the chart I've got here is similar to that 28-day rolling. It's basically every point on this chart is a mini cohort that is based on the group of people in the window up to that particular day. So this allows me to monitor it on a daily basis. So how do I go about this? Start with the observation that a lot of the data we want is in our existing database. So we have a database table with our users, user ID 1, Andy, signed up in 2013. And what I'd encourage you to do is, even if you're not, don't consider yourself super technical, to learn the SQL query language so that you can query your database. It's really not that hard. And if you're not technical yourself, at least just pair with someone on your team or someone who can help you out to answer questions. All you need is what we call a slave database copy for your analytics often referred to as like a read replica. So it's basically a live copy of your database so that you can do whatever you want to it without worrying about screwing it up, right? You don't want to take down the website because the founder was trying to answer some question. So here we got our database with our users, and as an example, vanity metric, select count star from users. This will say, how many users have we signed up in all time, right? Select count of everything, that's what star means, count of everything from users. So how many users do I have? So that's good, but it's like a vanity metric, right? So let's make it more useful. So let's do a cohort. So let's say, how many users signed up in July? So let's, same as before, select count from users where the created date was bigger than 1st of July, at midnight, and less than 1st of August. So what I've done there is I've created a simple cohort. How many signups did I get in July? So far, so good. Let's add some more. Let's get something meaningful. How many people bought something? So select count from users, and then in the white, it's who signed up in July. And we're joining in our sales table, so we're looking for all sales with the same user ID. And what we're saying is, I want to count how many sales we've got where the date of the sale is less than adding 1 month to the date the user was created. So let's just think about that for a second. What we're saying is, we take the date that the user was created, add 1 month, so we've got within 1 month of sign up. And we're saying, how many sales do we have where the sale was within 1 month of the user signing up? So this gives us a really actionable cohort metric, right? So we can say for the cohort of July, how many sales did we get? And this is the total number, sales from users that signed up that month. And then we could make it a percentage by dividing by the total number of users who signed up in that month. So that's the white that we had already. So this is great. And so the way I went about it was I spent like half a day as a technical person just to build a super simple system. To automate running the queries like every hour. So rather than having to be there at the prompt, like typing them in and hitting enter and getting the number, automate running these queries on like a cron job or a scheduled task, and just store them in a simple database with a table with columns for the metric name, the time that we calculated the metric, and the value. And then, when we've got the data in this format, for example, many different metrics and when they were calculated, it's super easy to just create a page to graph the results. So I did this all manually myself, and now actually, when you get this far, there's a bunch of tools you can actually plug in, like Chart.io or like business analytics tools that will help you do all sorts of amazing charting based on just having the raw data. And this was incredibly useful for me, which is why I'm sharing it with you. So the insight here is looking at the data that was in your own database and looking at how you can just use simple queries to get a lot of these metrics. So here we've got umpteen screenshots of how I use this for like every kind of metric. And the other part of it is using that rolling cohort. So every day it was like the cohort of the users in the 28 days up to that point in time. So used it for all sorts of metrics.